All right. Can everyone see that okay? Yes. Okay. I think I have some head nods. All right. Excellent. Well, welcome. I can't believe it is August 29th. Seeing that date, even though we are living it, is pretty wild with how quick summer can go by. Really grateful to be here, and thanks for everyone who's joining. I will start by introducing myself and then just going over what some of the goals are for today. So my name is Mary. As you might be able to tell from the pictures here, that is not what I look like today, but those are in fact pictures of my experiences going back to school many years ago. So I'm sure everyone here can think of their own experience going back to school, and I figured to get us started and to get myself in the space of remembering back to school, I would dig these back up, both to give myself a little bit of a giggle and see if I could kind of refresh what that experience was like for myself. I know some folks here, you might be already in the midst of getting back to school. For some, I know school started this week or it's starting next week. So I'll do my best to review lots of different ideas for supporting that transition, and just want to acknowledge people might be at different points in the getting back to school process. Also, again, going to approach this as someone who has started school myself many years ago, but also as a parent supporting my own child and getting ready for a new school. And as a clinician working with kids and caregivers as they return to school. Before jumping in, though, I do want to acknowledge, right, getting back to school, it's a common experience we've all gone through in some form or fashion, and everyone's experience can be different. What sticks out to you can be different. So my goals for today are to provide an overview of areas of difficulty, highlight some skills, some steps caregivers can take to hopefully ease that experience, and provide suggestions on additional resources for caregivers and others as well. Also think through maybe some indicators of when more help might be warranted or needed, and appreciate, it won't be an exhaustive review, but I'll do my best to cover and hopefully send folks in the right direction if there's more following. Okay, and then just please pull questions for the end. I will have an initial kind of chat request from you all, but for general questions, hold them to the end. You can either send them to the general chat or send them directly to Alex to help with going through. All right, so when you start, I do want to ask everyone in attendance, it's voluntary to participate, but would love to get some feedback. What word, singular word, not phrase, comes to mind when you hear back to school? No right or wrong answer. In fact, I would imagine there's a variety of words that might come to mind for myself and for others. So if anyone is brave enough, willing to share their word, I will not hold you to one, as I know that is difficult. I see stress. I see anxiety, routine, transitions, excitement. Okay, excitement twice. I love it. Traffic jam. That's very relatable. Sadness. Okay. We'll certainly keep them coming. I will say I'm not always the most tech savvy with the chat and watching. So if I miss it, I will kind of take a look in a few minutes. But in anticipation of today's presentation, I did ask a number of people in my life at different stages. I will note, what word comes to mind for them. So I'm going to shift us over to take a look at some of the words that came up, which seem to have some consistencies to what other folks have shared. All right, so aside from my very impressive transition in PowerPoint, which I say with great sarcasm, let's look at the list here, and I think I see some similarities. Traffic jam did not make it, but feels very applicable. But just kind of taking a look, I think some of these words of what comes up for folks when we're thinking about the start of school can really run the gamut. So, I see things from fear, nervous, anxiety, to relief, excitement, happy, motivated, courage. So lots of different words can come up when we think about back to school. In fact, I think it's not uncommon to have varying feelings. So sometimes someone might feel both excited and nervous. And while those might feel different or opposite in some ways, all about really trying to hold both is true today, even if they feel different or opposite in some ways. So lots of different things can come up. I will say for the people that I had kind of informally polled or reached out to, many of them came at it from different perspectives. Some came at it from their own experience. Some came at it as a parent with a child. Some have children who are young. Some have children who are older. Some have children who are adults and were reflecting on many years ago when their kids went to school. So I think that just represents the many different feelings and experiences people can experience when jumping back into school. All right. So getting back to school, really thinking about this as providing both opportunities and challenges. I originally worded this as common challenges and kind of wanted to reset myself to help remind, and keep kind of that perspective of, yes, these are challenges and these can also be good opportunities. And see how we can kind of anticipate them and think about what are some things we can do to prepare. So as you all know, the shift from summertime to school is a big one for all involved. So thinking a little bit about routines, I think I saw someone put their word as routine, so that was spot on and top of mind for me as well as we came in today. So whether the summer entailed camp or travel or spending time at home or a combination of all of those, routines are inevitably going to change come the school year. Change is inevitable. Change is good, but can be very tough and uncomfortable both for kids and adults. New teachers and staff. So certainly anticipating new faces, new teachers, new staff, new members of the team can be both exciting. It can be nerve-wracking, again, for kids and caregivers, as we're becoming familiar with who's going to be spending a good amount of time with kids day to day. So again, opportunity and sometimes a challenge or sometimes a source of worry. And then, of course, social interaction. So from meeting new kids, having new faces in the classroom, maybe worries connecting with new kids, seeing kids you haven't seen in a while. For some kids, if they've had a tough time connecting or if they've had experiences with bullying, this can be especially top of mind. And for some, they can be really excited to see their peers and really eager to get back at it. So again, lots of different considerations. Meeting academic demands, so kind of getting back in the loop of what comes with the academic demands, from learning to homework to really figuring out how to take on homework. I know this can be a big challenge, again, both for kids and for caregivers as we're shifting back into that. And then for some, separating from caregivers can be, again, opportunity to kind of take that next step, and sometimes for certain kids, a challenge. And I will say too, for some caregivers, it can be a challenge to separate, especially if your kid's moving on to a new school or just new to school. I think a lot of the words that I got from caregivers that I had checked in with to get words from prior to this presentation went from proud, excited. I had one parent who told me how pumped she was to get her child back to school, another parent who had some guilt about kind of getting the kid back into school or them just starting. So it can really bring up lots of different feelings, again, for kids and for caregivers. So we'll work on holding all of these things while we go through this. And again, certainly appreciate this is not an exhaustive list of opportunities and challenges that come up, but some of the things that come to mind or that we see more often when working with kids and families. All right. So thinking about some steps to prepare. Here are some that come to mind for me that have been focuses in recent sessions I have had, or things I'm even thinking about as I'm preparing my own kiddo. So engaging in routines proactively. I could probably do a whole other presentation on routines and thinking about routines. We all know routines are important, even for adults. I need routines, but kids especially thrive on routine and predictability. And this can be really hard. We know shifting to a new routine is difficult. So here are a couple considerations, and I do acknowledge, while proactive is ideal, it can be hard, especially if it's the 29th of August and school has started, but that doesn't mean you don't have a place to start here. So one thing to think about with routines is, of course, sleep, really a cornerstone of a good routine and a big area of difficulty, I know, for lots of kids and families. So in an ideal world, the more proactive you can be in preparing for any sleep changes from summer to the school year can be really helpful, whether it's kind of shifting the routine 15-minute increments every night, which may not always be possible, but something to consider. There are a lot of good, tips out there on sleep hygiene, so things that can really support good sleep routines. So some things include really trying to put screens away for an hour prior to bedtime to really help with the wind down, help with getting the brain and the body ready for sleep. Thinking about having kids wake up at the same time so that we're really setting them up for success to get down at the end of the day. Avoiding naps when kids are older. So of course, if you have a younger kid who still takes naps, by all means, keep that going. But for older kids that aren't always taking naps, really trying to cut those out or cut them down so that it really supports them getting to bed at a good hour and then waking up at the same time every day. Of course, I want to acknowledge there might be more specific concerns related to sleep. So by all means, reach out to your pediatrician if things are coming up around sleep or sleep difficulties, and you have bigger concerns about them. But certainly want to give a plug for sleep. I think other things to focus in on and consider are morning routines, after school and evening routines. So finding ways to make these predictable, achievable for kids, building in times with fewer demands, perhaps when they're coming back home. I know for a lot of families and kids I've worked with, for some kids, they might try really, really hard to keep it together during the school day and then get home and things are tough because, you've really tried to put on the best face and then falling apart a little bit. So are there ways to really ease them into coming back home, having some time with fewer demands before they're jumping into homework? What things can help set them up for success? Keeping in mind what the routine is sometimes hard for kids. Visual schedules, checklists, keeping things like that in place. Really having homework time to find out, thinking through approaches to support homework completion. So spaces for it, times of day that might be best or most conducive for them. For some kids that are really struggling with homework completion, considering some plans with teachers around anticipating what's coming. For caregivers to know where the homework is. Or is it in folders, Google Classroom? I'm sure there's plenty of different venues I'm not aware of. And sometimes we can also consider if homework's really a struggle, what are some of the skills we can use as caregivers to support completion, which I'll talk about in a little bit. When getting routines up and running too, I think there's things to make it more fun and engaging for kids. So if you're not quite at school but you're trying to get the sleep schedule down, perhaps a fun adventure, waking up at a certain time that might be earlier than normal, but going on a walk or going to go swing by the school and then having a picnic at the park or having special traditions, finding times for connection in the morning, perhaps a couple of minutes, 5 to 15 minutes of special time between caregivers and kids. To start the day. And I know that might feel impossible to some with the busyness of the morning, but just throwing things out there to see what can work for you and your family to consider how to really buffer and have some positive moments in there too. And then certainly collaborating with your child. If you can bring them to the table to think about routines, that can always be helpful. Are there areas of choice that you can have them engage in? And that will help perhaps get them more engaged in the process of the routines or places where there can be choice that feels reasonable, of course. So, you get to pick from this or this breakfast, or, maybe you get to choose, like, if we do this activity or that activity on the way to school. So finding those spaces that can help really engage the child in the process. And then certainly with separation challenges, thinking about the routine and having very, very simple and brief but consistent goodbye routines when needed for kids that really struggle with that separation. And sometimes working with the school team when separation challenges are coming up to help with the planning. So again, lots to say about routines, and those are hopefully a couple considerations to get started with if you haven't already. Second, if there's any orientation activities, these are certainly helpful to take advantage of. Good gradual exposure to kids, to families to know really what are we walking into, what does this look like, who's going to be there. So that if there is the ability to visit the school, see the space, meet the teacher, that can be really, really helpful just in anticipation of day one. Even if the child's not seeming worried about it, just having that step can be helpful. If this isn't possible, if this isn't a part of what the school's setting up, your child's going back and there's no big changes, still, I think having some opportunity to maybe run by the school with the child to get to kind of refamiliarize yourself with where you go and what that looks like, even just to the parking lot sometimes, practicing the routine of getting there. For some, is there any information online, pictures of the spaces, things like that, that can kind of be helpful when reviewing and anticipating what's to come. Certainly when challenges have occurred in the past or are anticipated at the start of the school year, it can be helpful to connect with a member of the school team, teacher, guidance counselor, and really make them a part of your team. We'll talk a little bit about this in a bit, but really thinking a little bit ahead of time. Is there a point person at school? Is there someone who might be a good person to connect with around problem solving, to have some plans in place when you're going into the school year, or to help with getting updates? And again, we'll talk a little bit about that soon, but certainly want to think about that as a step to prepare. Talking positively and confidently about school. And I will say, as a caregiver, this is hard for me sometimes because I get mixed up or worried in some of the things to come and, the what could go wrong. So I know as a parent with a child starting school again, anxiety, worry can be a very normal part of the process for some, and certainly not for all. So that said, really holding both of our valid emotions and portraying confidence in our child is really going to be of utmost importance. So how we present, how we talk about this is going to rub off on the kid. And that doesn't mean I want to invalidate people's worries or concerns. Those are important. And I'm hoping that we can also, again, working on holding both, really validate the things that might be nerve-wracking or worrisome, and also really thinking, how can I portray confidence? How can I ground myself in the why of what we're doing and getting them ready for school? And I have some strategies for us to think about that coming up in a few. Also thinking too, the first day of school, can we make it a celebration? Really kind of help have that positive attitude and positive approach to the first day of school, if that feels feasible for the family. And then social activities. So, summer can be a variety of things, but are there opportunities to help kids re-engage with other kids if they haven't seen a lot of kids? Maybe they have, but if they haven't, to really start to get back in the groove of those interactions, or perhaps there's meetups or play dates that you can do prior to the school year. If a child struggled, maybe even just preparing them for how to introduce themselves, like how to connect, thinking a little bit about that ahead of time, and finding opportunities like going to the park to try that out. Maybe thinking about extracurriculars that they can participate and be a part of a group. If that feels like a good match and feels like a good connection and way for them to have that outlet too. So jumping for a minute to just skills to use. There's so many skills to use, but I did want to think about a couple things that can help with behavior, with worries, and specifically for, we could kind of really make this more specific to some of the back to school worries, challenges that might come up. Want to really empower parents and caregivers around what you can do and some of the ways to approach it. So I think big picture, what we want to do always is really think about how we're able to provide space for kids and really kind of build on the positive and give a lot of good attention to the positive. So one of the first things I think about is that concept of really active listening. So kids might share concerns. A lot of us might jump to kind of problem solving, advice giving. I know that sometimes is what I do, and I need to pause and kind of catch myself and really see, okay, what is the kind of, what is the child looking for in this place? So sometimes just being able to pause, validate how they're feeling, give them the space to talk about their concerns can be really helpful. So that space is open and a good place for them to, whether it's vent or look for advice, we can kind of get a little bit more of an idea of what they're looking for in that moment. And certainly validate how they're feeling. And validation, I will say, doesn't mean you need to agree. So sometimes kids will say, oh, I'm so anxious about this. And we think like there's nothing to be anxious about, or, oh, this is so unfair. And we might think, oh, that feels completely fair and reasonable. So sometimes just validating how someone feels, and especially a child in that situation as a starter, can just help with getting that conversation started. And then seeing where it goes from there, but really active listening, kind of sitting back, seeing where that goes, and providing opportunities to check in about school as the year gets started. Some people might incorporate that into their routine at dinner, might share a highlight and a challenge from the day or at the end of the day. So considering those spaces and providing those spaces for kids. I will say, Over the years of working, I've certainly had plenty of kids, or pardon me, parents, caregivers tell me, oh, my child will never share anything with me. I think I saw something funny the other day on the internet somewhere, where a parent posted something like, oh, I asked my child what they did in school today, and they said nothing, normal day. And then later I saw a picture of them holding a crocodile because they had like various animals visit them at school. So I want to appreciate too, sometimes we don't get the full report from kids. And I know that can feel really challenging when you really want to hear what's going on, hear how they're feeling. But I do want to put a plug out there for just setting up one-on-one or special time with your child and using that as really a moment just to connect. And not just connecting is really important, and it can be really tough in the busyness of the week, but really setting aside 5 to 15 minutes per day to be able to just connect with your child. Provide space to kind of engage in an activity, whether it's a teenager, you're walking, playing basketball, going for a ride, to maybe like a younger kid doing blocks or magnetiles or something active that you can just enjoy and engage in and pull back from questions. So actually just making it a space really to connect, and that's the agenda and that's the goal. And this in turn can really help build up those positive interactions and potentially down the line, help kids open up and help kids kind of have that space consistently to connect, which can help in many facets of life. When it comes to labeled praise, positive praise, this is huge for, again, everything kids do, and really kind of making sure we're shifting our attention to all the good and the things that we want to see. So when it comes to school, if we have kids that are struggling with getting through the routine or resisting or pushing back, really keeping our eyes out for any moment where they follow through or listen the first time, or maybe complete a task without being asked initially. If it's a kid who's really anxious or worried, right, and they might be both kind of pushing back and anxious and worried, there's a lot of overlap here. But perhaps, they're really worried or anxious about things, and you see them do something slightly brave, right? Really being able to use labeled praise to call that out, give them that good attention, give them that good feedback. When we think about labeled praise, our formula typically is really thinking about a positive statement and following that up with something specific, so that we can really highlight for the child what we noticed, what we were impressed by, and they know exactly what it is that we're sharing. So things like, I'm so impressed by how you spoke to that peer at the park all by yourself, so that they really can get that good feedback, ideally as quickly as possible. Or if they're struggling with kind of getting through their routine in the morning and they get one thing done, wow, I love how you got that done right away. You're such a good listener. And so this can be helpful in just trying to help give the attention to the things we want to see more of and support with getting through tough moments, like morning and afternoon routines and things like that. We always think of labeled praise as so hugely important, and we always want to make sure we're doing it throughout the day, and sometimes just finding those little successes. We sometimes have to redefine what success is to find moments of labeled praise. But another thing that can help supplement getting through the day, supporting tough moments, supporting things that kids struggle with, is finding ways to use rewards to supplement our efforts. So if morning routine is challenging, and they can earn a point, a pom-pom, something for every step that they take through the morning routine, that can help with kind of keeping that motivation up. But again, always making sure that good labeled praise is still incorporated in there. For younger kids, that might be a sticker chart, as they complete every part of their morning routine. If homework's difficult, for example, that might be another place where you're supplementing a little bit. And families can also think about what are kids already getting, and really just trying to shift to, if you complete this, then you can do that. So for, if screen time is a part of your routine already, and certainly appreciate if it is not, you can disregard this suggestion. But if it is, and homework is a part of your afternoon routine, maybe for every homework assignment you complete, you get X number of minutes of screen time. Again, when age appropriate. Or I've had some kids who are just absolutely thrilled to be able to earn, a 5-minute later bedtime. So finding those little things that can help just supplement while keeping that good positive place in the midst of all of that. Also thinking about morning routines, evening routines, getting through the day, checklists, visuals can go a really long way for kids. And again, I'm going to keep saying it, for caregivers too, and that includes myself. So keeping track of, what are all the things we need to do in the morning routine? What are all the things we need ready for our backpack? What are all the things we need, like lunch? There's so much to keep track of, and in the busyness of the day, having that somewhere, having a visual, having a checklist can really help with supplementing and keeping us on track. And I will say too, sometimes there's things that we can identify we can do proactively. Can we put clothes out the night before? Can we pack our bag the night before? Are there things that can kind of ease different parts of that routine as well? So I know for a lot of kids and adults, again, going into the school year, feeling worried can be a big part of what's going on. And so first, I want to just kind of revisit what it means to worry and kind of how anxiety works in helpful ways and sometimes overworks and in moments where we might not need it to be as strong as it is. I will say at the end, I'm going to share a list of some past seminar series that have been done that can dive a little deeper into some of these areas, but do want to make sure we ground ourselves in what worry and anxiety is, how it works before we dive into some of the strategies for that. So when we think about anxiety or worry, typically when those worries or anxieties come up, we tend to avoid whatever it is we might be worried about or anxious about. And what's tricky is that can feel really good. More immediately, we might have some short-term relief, which can make it feel like avoidance is the right move. But then what happens is anxiety around whatever that thing is can increase over time. Now, I want to say anxiety is sometimes very good, very helpful, and very indicated, right? So if I have a, wild animal walking in my backyard, I better get anxious and I better avoid it. So it's important. It is something we need. Anxiety is good in many respects. And sometimes anxiety or worries can kick up when they're not needed. And so recognizing what we call here as false alarms. Sometimes those periods where something might come up that maybe makes us worried or anxious, and there's valid reason for that, but isn't an actual threat, isn't something we truly have to avoid for safety. And paying attention to those moments to see what our response is can be really important. There can be a lot of fears that come up with starting school. Fears of seeing new kids, fears of getting homework done because it's hard, fears of failing, right? And so we might see kids be kind of nervous to talk to peers and maybe avoid those conversations. And again, that might feel good initially, but that might make it feel more worrisome over time. We're really fearful about doing homework because they might get it wrong. And then we avoid it. I know I've done that. And then it might feel good to not face that right away, but it just makes us more anxious about that over time. So really thinking about kind of this cycle of anxiety can be helpful to remember that yes, avoidance is going to feel good, but in fact, it might make that anxiety bigger, can be a helpful reminder for all of us around how to approach and how to support kids, and again, ourselves as these things come up as we get going into the school year. So one strategy that we can use, and this comes from SPACE, which is an evidence-based intervention that a number of our clinicians incorporate into the work, which stands for Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. So this is an approach for kids who are anxious, and gives caregivers actually lots of strategies. I have some information on the bottom of the page with a link that you can always check out yourself. But is the idea of supportive statements. So really thinking just how we respond to kids that are feeling worried when we're noticing that come up. So the formula here is using validation and acceptance of whatever it is that feels worrisome or fearful, then portraying and really making sure that we express our confidence, and that helping to lead to support. So this is helpful for ourselves too. But for example, I can see you're nervous about the first day of school, and I know you can do it. So that validates and accepts how the child is feeling, and that helps portray confidence. And I know you can do it. Or as a parent, right? Like if you're feeling worried, day one will be hard for them, and I know they can be successful, or I know I'm setting them up for success by helping them do this. So it helps us, again, really hold both, validate and accept the thing we're feeling worried about or the thing they're feeling worried about, and portray confidence, which can just, that change of wording can help shift things too. And when it comes to that tendency for us to avoid when we're managing worries, whether they're big or small or somewhere in between, being able to kind of gradually expose to the thing we're worried about can be really helpful. And so really thinking, is this thing they're worried about a false alarm? If so, and again, I appreciate things are not always black and white, but if it feels like, okay, not talking to peers or interacting with peers can be unpleasant, and it's not unsafe. Let's think through how we can help kids gradually face their fears in this situation. So, what's the first step? If kids haven't done it in a while, perhaps it's just going to the park and kind of being around kids, or standing 20 feet away if that feels too overwhelming. Perhaps it's first smiling at a peer or waving at a peer, and maybe the next step is saying hi, and maybe the next step is trying to ask a question. So, it doesn't always need to be that broken down, but certainly finding ways to help gradually expose to the thing that's fearful can really be helpful in retraining our brain around, this fear, this thing that's worrisome. When it comes to getting to school, that's where some of the ideas around just getting there ahead of time, seeing what the space looks like, can be helpful too. And some kids don't need this stepwise way to get there, but certainly as you're seeing that around the school year, finding ways to get it, to kind of build that in, can be really helpful. Okay. So let's think a little bit about communicating and collaborating with schools. And so this can be really important, especially when there are challenges that are coming up or continuing to come up, and really wanting to come up with kind of a plan and really establishing ourselves with the school team. So I think first and foremost, what's really key is being able to see teachers, counselors, school members as members of the team. I think I've seen elsewhere people kind of refer as like, we want each other to be allies, and really setting up a successful return to school and school year. We want to be mindful too of what's on educators' plates at school. There's a lot going on, and so we want to be thoughtful about finding a way to really have that communication and do so in a way that's going to be supportive and conducive to what's on everyone's plates, but also supports in making sure that the caregivers and teachers and team members are in touch in the ways that are really going to be supportive of kids' well-being and success. So there's definitely ways that we can work to establish systems to communicate, and that will help pay off at the end. So there's benefit to everyone being on the same page and working together. So really thinking about, proactive planning and supportive interventions. So, if there's an area of concern, really raising it as proactively as possible with the teacher, with the team, to think about what might be helpful, and also working together to support the child, see if there's perhaps like feedback about approaches they've used before with other kids, or ways that they've been able to incorporate that into their classrooms in the past. Thinking about supportive interventions. I think this can really, it really depends on what's going on with your child in terms of what a supportive intervention might look like. So we might consider accommodations at points for certain needs. And certainly we'll talk a little bit about an evaluation if that's needed, or special education services, but sometimes accommodations are really helpful, and also paying attention with school team and with families around, when accommodations are almost too much and can lead to avoidance when anxiety or worry is present. And there's not always a scripted way of figuring that out, but that's something that teams can work together to identify, and when needed, when it's becoming a bigger issue, if there's a clinician or counselor involved to help with really exploring that, can be helpful too. Certainly we know home and school are always going to be two different environments, but when we can have some consistency in approaches between home and school, that can be tremendously helpful. So for example, if there's, challenges with either behavior or participation, really thinking through, are there ways that we can first and foremost really be identifying the positive when the child engages, when the child kind of follows through, or when the child's participating in the way they should. How can we make sure that we're in all environments really label praising that, or thinking about when we need to supplement with awards, and having consistency in our schedules between home and school. Also ensuring that kind of expectations for things are clear between home and school around homework or tasks that need to be done, or things like that. We also want to consider ways to set up regular communication when needed. We want to balance the teacher's capacity and think about proactive communication. Always, and I would say always, trying to emphasize and include successes. So we're keeping our lens out for those positives for kids that are struggling. Some families might set up a system when needed. Again, this is not going to be needed for all kids, but around, whether it's like a weekly check-in or, if needed, even more frequent than that. But we also need to kind of proactively work with teachers and counselors to see what's feasible in the classroom and what is the best method of communicating to. I also think a little bit about, when is email or those types of communication going to be sufficient versus when is a meeting potentially needed. So if challenges are persisting, creating barriers to accessing aspects of school, it might be better to have a meeting, if there are things coming up, and knowing that setting up a meeting might take a little time, but I think that can be sometimes a better venue when there's bigger concerns coming up, because we know miscommunications can happen in email. Or communication can be lost. So that can be a nice way to connect in person, and also helpful to prepare ahead of time, letting the teacher and the team know what it is that's hoping to be discussed. So everyone can prepare, think ahead about what they're going to bring in, and have a good agenda established to make the most of the time too. And then, of course, if there's challenges that are persisting, concerns about impairment in a child being able to access the curriculum or struggling with social or emotional needs in school, caregivers certainly have rights to request an evaluation to determine if a child can qualify for special education services, or if they already have those supports in place, and there's new or different concerns. You're always able to kind of re-request the team to reconvene and speak further. While I don't have a specific, spot for this here, I do also want to acknowledge that with getting back to school for kids that have experienced or do experience, bullying, and this can be a really tough thing to navigate. This can be something to collaborate with the school around too. I do know all schools have kind of a bullying prevention policy or approach for every school district. So keeping that in mind if that's coming up, to make sure that you can explore and approach that in whatever ways needed. I know that can be really tough, and something where some good collaboration can really go a far way. So when to get more help. So I will say this is by no means an exhaustive list. If your gut's telling you to seek out help, by all means, listen to it. And you can always ask and kind of get some feedback about, okay, this is a good time to get some additional help, or why don't you take these steps and then circle back? So we often expect a period of change and transition can be tough and bring up some things and bring up some bigger worries than are typical. I know transitions, again, are hard for everyone. So I want to acknowledge that. And also, if we're seeing that these challenges are really persisting beyond a few weeks, maybe to a month, or really impacting access to the curriculum and learning and kind of connecting with peers, that might be a point in time where, it might be indicated to start to reach out and see if additional support would be needed. The bottom three, I think, can certainly be ones that I highlight too, and I know we're seeing here at the clinic. So if there's big concerns around school refusal, that can be really challenging, as again, we think of that cycle of avoidance can really kind of take hold in that moment. So if a child's really refusing school, refusing big aspects of school, if a child's really struggling to speak in school, speak with peers, speak with teachers, selective mutism is a concern, or really impairing behavioral challenges, big challenges with anxiety, by all means, certainly don't hesitate to move forward and get some additional help to navigate those. So here's some information on our center. This is our Waltham location. We do have locations in Boston, as Alex mentioned, as well as Waltham. And we're doing really time-limited interventions that are focused on evidence-based care to support with some of the areas of concern that might be coming up. I will say we do a lot of parent consultation and training too, which I think, as a parent, I'm really grateful and appreciative of, because you're really the ones on the ground, your kid best. And there are certainly individual interventions as well. So we are one center. I know there are others out there, but do want to note that. And certainly, I think we don't have all the space today to dive into all of the things that can come up as it relates to school. I do want to put a plug out there for some of my really impressive colleagues who have spoken in these forums before about different areas of concern. This isn't the exact name of all of them, but you can check out on our website some of these different topics that have been discussed in the past. So school refusal, treating depression, anxiety, selective mutism, ADHD and disruptive behavior, trauma awareness, screen time, and certainly, everything can kind of fall into school. So by all means, check those. I will say I did not have the full list of the ones coming up this year. I do know there's one coming up. I believe it's in March around caregiver approaches for anxiety, which I know we touched on today. But feel free to check it out. There might be some other areas that you can do a deeper dive into. And of course, if you need more specific consultation around your child, reach out directly to our center so we can really think through next steps and whether any of our treatments will be a good match for you as well. And then here are some resources too. This, again, not an exhaustive list, but a couple things that come to mind. CHADD, Children and Adults with ADHD, they have a great back to school resource on their website that I encourage you to check out. A lot of those interventions that they list there are very consistent with some of the things that we do in some of our parent consultation. So a very helpful resource, CDC, Child Mind. Certainly, again, there's other things out there, but just wanted to point to a couple things that might be helpful for you to take a look at if you're looking for some more information external to CET and our agency. So again, cannot cover all of the things that I know might come up, but did want to give an overview of some opportunities and challenges, some strategies that might be helpful when thinking about school, and just some pointers when thinking about collaborating with the school team too. I know every school district and school is different, and really appreciate all feedback, that comes from parents and their experiences and those that are working in the schools themselves, as there's always more to learn about what will help in terms of approaches. But I hope this just gave us a good starter and some things to think about for today as we take on the new school year. And then here are some references, things that I had referenced when putting this together, and please check out our blog posts for some more information as well. All right. Any questions? And I see Alex did post about blog posts as well as previous webinars, which can again do a deeper dive into some of these areas. Thank you, Nicole. All right. Well, if there aren't any further questions, again, I really encourage you to reach out, look at those resources. Again, every situation's different, every school is different, but hopefully this just gave you a good place to start. And, really give you all the best as we start a new school year. And thanks so much for joining us today.